This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Your IT skills are outdated in about 18 months. Stay ahead of the curve and strengthen your IT expertise with affordable certification-based learning that will launch or advance your career. Individuals use the code TWIT30 for 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership at go.acilearning.com/twit. For the longest time in the U.S., if we want to send payments to friends, we'd use Venmo or PayPal or the Cash App. It turns out, and I did not know this, in the rest of the world, their governments provided clearinghouses that were free and widely available and instantaneous. We just never had one in the U.S. The Federal Reserve Bank has now launched it. It's called FedNow, an instant payment service that costs nothing. Now, of course, it's got to attach to your bank, and your bank may end up charging you, even though it costs nothing for the Fed to do it. They're launching with 41 banks, 15 service providers, including J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of New York Mellon, Bancorp. They plan to add more banks and credit unions as the year goes by. The Fed has always run a clearinghouse that's taken days. Remember writing checks? You'd write a check. You put it in the mail, put a 5-cent stamp on it, and you'd put it in the mailbox. They don't have any of that anymore, by the way. And then it would arrive, and the dentist's office would take it, and they would cash it, and the bank they cashed it at would send it to the Federal Clearinghouse, which, I think somebody with sleeve garters and a green visor would look at it and then stamp it, and then 3 or 4 days later, that money would be transferred over from your account to the dentist. It would clear. That's how we did it until recently, and I think the Fed has finally caught up with the 21st century and the rest of the world. Thoughts on FedNow? You covered the SVB bank run. One consideration, I know, Ranjan, was that this would really supercharge a bank run in the future, make it a lot easier.
No, but I think this is a huge story, because I think this is a perfect example of a friction that has existed in industry over the last 15, 20 years, that anyone who has traveled, anyone who has friends who live abroad, especially in Europe or in Asia, who can send money to each other instantly, they don't think about what's the fee going to be? Is it a wire transfer? What app do I have to use? All this stuff just works, and it should work here. Money should move back and forth very quickly. And I think it's a good reminder that sometimes, like a federal centralized program like this that would be most efficient actually is the right solution. And I think obviously the cryptocurrency dream that was sold for a long time around instant payments and ability to send money. Why can't you send money on a Saturday or when the bank is closed? I think it's finally time that becomes reality. We catch up.
Isn't this proof that crypto won? And this is like a defensive move from the Fed to say, okay, this was our weakness that could have let the Bitcoiners sort of take over. And what's happened now is that, the mainstream way of paying is actually going to resemble a little bit more like what the crypto dream looked like.
Well, it was the dream, but remember, crypto transfers sometimes took a very long time to clear, right? Even though it was fully digital, because of the way Bitcoin worked, it could sometimes take days for a Bitcoin transaction to clear.
This is the true victory that they've pushed the Federal Reserve to be their dream, but even better.
That was exactly what the entire industry wanted.
Satoshi Nakamoto, when he sat down to write that paper, thought about this instant Fed Venmo thing and said, if we could get that to happen,
wow, I
could die happy.
Wow. Check your bank to see if you can get FedNow, and also check to see what they may add on as additional fees. It is widely expected banks will somehow manage to make some money out of this, even though the Fed does not charge for it.
Yeah, but it's also a good reminder, again, I think public-private partnerships and the potential for them and where they can work well. And this is always with payments, having one centralized source that was connected to every individual bank that could basically, as you said, as Alex said, live the crypto dream and be that ledger. It does not need to be decentralized. It's in fact centralized, and it can match payments instantly, I think. And then, I mean, banks can profit off of this, and that's okay. I think, it's how much they charge, and that level of competition obviously will just kind of continue within the banking industry. But having that underlying infrastructure, I mean, anyone, again, coming from a trading background, especially I worked in emerging market trading. So seeing how kind of, an efficient infrastructure could then grow entire economies or just help other things happen, I think it was a reminder that, it's something that's been lacking in the U.S. for a while.
I don't know how long ago you were at B of A, Ranjan, but B of A was one of the companies, one of the banks that started Zelle, which was the banking industry's response to Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Apple Pay. A lot of people think Zelle is a problem because it's very easy. If you can trick somebody into Zelling you, you got their money, and the banks aren't going to stand behind it.
I find it's a problem because if I ever say the word Zelle out loud in a social situation, I will be
That's the other problem is kids go, "What? You're using Zelle? Could you please Venmo me, please?"
You're out of the room. You're kicked out.
Yeah.
But that was also the fraud problems that happened with Zelle. I think were a reminder that it's this eternal tension between friction, especially when it comes to financial services. But remember, Venmo had a lot of issues, especially in its early days when it was trying to grow around fraud or illicit utilization. So I think it's just payments always a reminder that it's a battle between friction and
utility.
Ease. Yeah, ease and utility.
This is hysterical because I'm with a bank that is not signing up for FedNow so far. They have a bill pay service, and most of the time it's not an ACH. The bank prints a check, which they put in the mail and send to the payee. Why is it in the United States, where we should be on the cutting edge, we are so far behind every other country in the world? How does Canada or France or any of these other countries, how do they handle the fraud issue? How does the Fed propose to handle the fraud issue? Banks have said, we don't want to be responsible. If you Zelle somebody money, that's your problem, dude. We're not going to give it to you back if it turns out to be fraudulent.
One of the problems that's happened with Zelle, again, is if you accidentally send to the wrong person,
right,
if you send too much money. But I think these kind of things, these are just like UX challenges, right? These are however these things are built. When Venmo started, there was no two-factor authentication. So, at a time where you wouldn't even need a secondary input, someone could grab your phone and send money. So I think, every single bank, maybe the Fed, to be part of the program, does put some liability on the banks, which would force them to put in some additional checks. Because remember, so far with Zelle, banks have been so desperate to compete against Venmo on volume that they would do anything to get you over there, and they would remove all friction to get you to use Zelle in the hopes that you switch away from Venmo. Now, if they have a better, more secure solution that works very well, adding an extra button, adding an extra, are you sure you want to send it to this person? Can you check the amount? These kind of things. I don't think it's no longer going to kneecap them versus what was happening where they're trying to compete against Venmo.
Yeah.
And Zelle does have an interstitial anytime, at least with Chase. I mean, I use it a lot for business, and anytime I try to use it, there's an interstitial there talking through like 6 different types of scams, saying that if someone told you to send money this way, then you should probably,
that's why,
pause. And that's good friction there.
I used to say Zelle is fine. It's no worse. On the radio show, people would ask, because there was another finance radio host who used to rail against Zelle, probably for reasons of his own. But people would say, well, you shouldn't use Zelle. I said, well, it's no different than Venmo or PayPal, or frankly, an ATM machine. If you take money out of an ATM machine because somebody walked up to you and said, hey, I can't get home. Can you give me $20 for gas? And you gave them that money. The bank's not liable for that. Why should the bank be liable for that? So I'm not sure I really understand why people think the bank should be liable for a Zelle transaction. But I'm glad that they are at least kind of warning people that don't fall for this and don't fall for that. It's
I think it's a good reminder, especially large banks, in terms of having this stuff built in, because again, their financial incentives are definitely away from allowing too much fraud or too many scams happening where people lose all trust, because they don't want to lose your trust on Zelle and then you don't want to get a mortgage with them. So
I think what happened is when credit card companies came along, everybody was afraid to use them. So the credit card companies, in order to get you to use credit cards, said, well, don't worry, if there's a fraudulent transaction, we'll back it up. We'll give you your money back. And they had to do that to get people to use plastic. But that's just because they didn't have a choice. I mean, financial institutions don't. So in other words, we got a false sense of security thanks to credit cards.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to back up any purchase when you're charging 18% interest.
Yeah, they can afford to. Exactly. All right. Well, anyway, watch for FedNow coming to a bank near you or not. I bet my bank now. So this is why I brought up Zelle, because I think the banks have already put so much investment into getting Zelle up and running that they don't want to do FedNow. They're like,
I think they're ready to move past Zelle.
Are they?
Everyone
I hope
wants
so.
to move past Zelle.
I hope you're right.
Is it the name of Zelle? Like, what makes Zelle so unattractive?
The name. It's the name.
Is it?
I don't know what it is about it, but I think I've said it out loud. I've heard other people say it out loud, and every time, and it almost always naturally comes up in a very social situation. You're at dinner, you're somewhere where you need to send someone money, and you're all talking about it. Somehow Venmo just rolls off the tongue, but Zelle just makes everyone stop for a moment.
That's just
I just walked by
Isn't that funny?
a Wells Fargo, and their money send thing I think is called Fargo, which I think is the best of all the names. Hey, with Fargo. Or Fargo is your money assistant.
Fargo me, man.
Or Farg you.
Fargo
I'll
me.
Farg you.